In this lesson, we'll access and customize tools. After completing this lesson, you'll be able to demonstrate how to access tools on the ribbon, use the marking menu, modify tools listed on the ribbon, use design shortcuts, and modify design shortcuts. In Fusion 360, we're going to carry on with our utility knife upload file. This is simply going to be used to help us better identify and understand the user interface in Fusion. At this point, we've already worked with a few designs, but we need to make sure that we understand all of the areas of Fusion 360. So to get started, let's take a look at the user interface and identify a few of the areas. I'm going to start in the upper right-hand corner. This area contains the Profile, Preferences, Notifications, and Help. So let's start on the right-hand side and take a look at Help. When we select Help, we can search directly here. We can show the Learning panel, which has things like quick tips as well as modeling essentials. From here, you can use these modeling essentials to help you get acquainted with Fusion 360. For example, have created cylinder, use different faces on your models as planes. When you select Learn More, it'll bring up Fusion 360 help on the web pointed at this topic. We also have various other areas such as learning and documentation. There's self-paced learning as well as product documentation. There's also quick setup, access to the community forums, things like the feedback hub, the roadmap for future updates, and the Fusion 360 blog where you can get information about what's going on. There's a support and diagnostics section, what's new, as well as about. The next drop-down contains your user preferences and access to your profile. I'm going to select Preferences as this is a great place to take a look at some of the options in Fusion 360. I'm using the default Pan, Zoom, and Orbit shortcuts set to Fusion 360. But if you're not comfortable with the Fusion layout, you can take a look at some of the others and see if they're more comfortable for you. Inside of here, we have general areas for things like design, manufacture, electronics, and as we go all the way down to the bottom, we have a section called Preview Features. Preview features are a way for Fusion 360 developers to push new functionality as optional inside of the software. For example, if we want to take a look at General, we can see things that are only a preview feature, such as AnyCAD, Edit in Place, and the Mesh Workspace. These options are great ways for users to take a look at new functionality that's coming out and test it and provide feedback. These are all optional, so you can turn them on or off at any time. In this upper section, we also have already taken a look at job status, but we also have something called extensions and notifications. Notifications will show you any new notifications that have come out for Fusion 360. For example, this design is opened by more than one team member. Continuing may result in a design conflict. These are the types of warnings that you might see in the Notification Center. Extensions have to deal with the manufacturing workspace. Currently, as we're sitting in June of 2020, there is free access to the manufacturing workspace, but that's not always the case. In general, it's usually about 125 cloud credits per month, and this gives you access to advanced functionality inside of the manufacturer workspace. For example, access to additive manufacturing, 5-axis and collision avoidance, as well as hole recognition. We're not going to be taking a look at that right now, but now you understand what that icon means. As we move our way across, you'll also see things like the plus icon, which allows to create new untitled designs, or the X that allows to close designs. There's always going to be at least one document open, whether it's a design that you're working on or an untitled document. In the upper left, we have access to the Data panel, as well as the File dropdown and things like Undo and Redo. Fusion 360 has a large cache of undo moves, so keep in mind that you can undo and redo a lot of moves in Fusion 360. Just below that, we have access to our toolbar. This is a standard tab interface, and in the Design Workspace, you can see that we have tools in the Create, Modify, Assemble, Construct, Inspect, Insert, and Select areas. But there's also secondary tabs for things like surfacing, sheet metal, and a dedicated one for tools. You will notice that several of them will get replicated, such as the Inspect Measure tool, as well as our Select dropdown. Some of them, such as the solids, will have Create, Sketch, as well as in the surface and sheet metal. But keep in mind that many of these tools, while they are in several different locations, may behave differently. We'll take a look at that a little bit later in our course. While the toolbar is going to be our go-to reference for accessing tools, there are many other ways in which we can access them. As we take a look at the Create dropdown, you'll notice that Extrude has the letter E next to it. E is a shortcut for that feature. Hole has the letter H next to it. And as we take a look at some of the others, you may notice shortcut keys such as F for fillet, Q for press pull, and M for move copy. We also have the letter S on the keyboard, which will bring up what's called the design shortcuts. The design shortcuts will contain shortcuts for various things. We can also search, for example, if we wanted to take a look at some of our selection tools. And if we want to add anything to our design shortcuts, we can use the up arrow. The up arrow will place something, for example, select, directly onto our design shortcuts. If we want to remove it, we simply need to use the X. This is also true for things like the Create dropdown. For example, revolve, if we select the three dots, pin to toolbar, pin to shortcuts, or change keyboard shortcut. So these are great ways in which you can customize the user interface of Fusion 360. We also have something from the right-click menu called the Marking menu. The Marking menu contains some quick options for accessing tools. In the 6 o'clock position, we have sketching, which brings us to a second level of the Marking menu. There are quick ways in which we can use the Marking menu. For example, when I right-click and take a look at Move Copy in this position, if I simply do that motion relatively quickly, it brings me right to the Move Copy tool. So once you get comfortable with what tools are available on the right-click Marking menu, it can really speed up the process. Also note below it there's a menu that has some display options, some options for isolating, navigating workspaces, and some contextual-based options. Right now, Extrude, Fillet, Look At, and Zoom Window are the defaults. But if we select something on design and right-click, you'll notice that menu changes. We now have Fillet and Chamfer, Show Hide, Select, Unselectable, and then we have Find in Browser and Find in Window. For example, if we select Find in Browser, it's going to expand that component in the browser, highlight the body where that edge is contained. In the upper right-hand corner, we've already seen the view cube, and this is a great way for us to rotate our model and always go back to a home position. We also have the option, when we're looking in certain views, to rotate the model by 90 degrees. And there's a drop down at the lower right-hand corner that allows us to do things such as change our camera. We can set our current view as home, or we can set our current view as front or top. There are also display options in the bottom center of our modeling window, which is also called the canvas area. This is our navigation bar and display settings. The tools on the left-hand side are for navigation, things like panning, rotating, zooming, and the options on the right-hand side, these are going to be our display settings. These allow us to change things like the visual style of our model, we can also change settings for our camera, effects, and the environment that we're in. There are options for displaying a grid, whether or not it's going to snap, and changing viewports. For example, we can turn on multiple viewports if you're comfortable modeling in that aspect. We're going to reset all of our options back to the default settings that we're using. If we take a look, you can see my effects are ambient occlusion and anti-aliasing. My camera is currently set to perspective with ortho faces, which means that any rotation view is going to be in perspective, but when I go to something like a right view, it'll snap to an orthogonal view. On the left-hand side, we have what's called the browser. At the top, the browser will display our components, bodies, document settings such as our units, named views that we can use later on in detailed drawings, and also things like our origins, joints, whether or not there are any images, in this case a canvas image, sketches, and construction geometry, such as planes and axes. This is a great way for us to easily see and organize components and bodies in our design. There's also a comment section at the bottom where we can capture screenshots and information about the design. This is especially helpful when you're moving between workspaces or collaborating with other users. And lastly, at the very bottom, we have something called the timeline. The timeline is a history-based capture of features and elements in the design. For example, this design started with the insert of an image, then a sketch was created, a plane, followed by a free-form body shown in purple, and then various features that were used to create the design. We can identify various areas such as groups of components, areas where components were created, areas where components were grounded, joints were applied, and references were made. So we can quickly and easily see all this information in the timeline as it's captured in most of our designs. We'll see later on when we work with imported designs that history capture is not on by default. We've also taken a look at the different workspaces. We've navigated to the render workspace and took a look at ray tracing, but there's also workspaces for things like generative design, animation, simulation, manufacture for creating toolpaths, as well as detailed drawings. We'll be taking a look at several of these later on in our course, but for right now, even though we haven't made any design changes, let's go ahead and save this utility knife upload, and then we can move on to the next step.